Dr. Porter's brisk, black-haired wife fed Truth and showed her to a pleasant room. At 6 the next morning, she was awakened and allowed to visit her uncle, who still lay unconscious in bed with a bandaged head. She kissed him on the cheek and then left to eat her breakfast. Squire was there at 7 as he had promised, and with him was his wife Lily. She was slender and pretty, with delicate features and large, shining dark eyes. Her smile was warm as she held out her hands to Truth. "We hope to see Mr. Douglas tonight. Squire has sent him an overnight telegraph message, so he'll know we are coming." Truth turned to the doctor's wife and said, "I thank thee. I know thee and thy husband will care for my uncle and send him to us when thee can. Yes, dear, thee can rely on us as friends. Go now. May God take care of thee and make smooth thy way." Squire, Lily, and Truth led for the train station in a hired horse cab. They went down narrow streets filled with carts and carriages out so early in the day. How noisy and crowded this city was. When they arrived at the station, they walked through the building, passing the spot where the hoodlums had attacked her uncle. Truth shuddered. During the ride, Lily had told her why Quakers were held in such contempt. There had been riots in New York City last summer over the first federal draft call. There was much ill will toward blacks, who were still considered the cause of the vicious war. Some had been killed, and an orphanage for black children had been burned. As a sect that aided many blacks to freedom, Quakers were hated. It was dangerous for them to go out at night. Knowing this now, Truth looked anxiously about her, marking people's glances at the three of them. Most were curious, but some were unfriendly. She was happy when they boarded the train. She felt safe there. One thing could be said for Washington. It wasn't one bit like Goldsboro, North Carolina. Truth had expected it to be a larger Goldsboro. It wasn't. This city didn't seem to be finished yet, with its big buildings set far apart enough so that a person had quite a walk to get from one to another. Some of the biggest ones had scaffolding around them, with cubes of gleaming white marble and large stones and pieces of timbers lying nearby. Washington was humid and hot and smelled of a swamp. Swarms of gnats and mosquitoes bedeviled the three travelers and the horse and driver that Squire had hailed. Though it was early evening, the streets, muddy from a recent rain, were full of people. Most of the men she saw were blue-coated soldiers who constantly saluted one another as they stepped carefully around puddles and ruts. Trinket peddlers and oyster vendors accosted them. Hoop-skirted ladies walked in pairs under parasols. Squire pointed out the buildings to her. "That one is the Capitol, the one with the dome being constructed. It'll have a Statue of Freedom on top pretty soon." "Where's President Lincoln?" "At the Executive Mansion." "Where's Mr. Douglas?" "At the Kirkwood Hotel on 12th Street. Look there. See that big building with all the windows? That's the Willard Hotel." Truth looked. The building was very large, but it was not as interesting as the sight of a group of Confederate soldiers walking along under guard. "Reb prisoners," said Squire, noticing her stare. "The men on the other side of the street, the ones in pale blue, with crutches and canes. They're wounded Union soldiers. There are plenty of army hospitals in Washington." "How long will we be here?" she asked, thinking of her gold coins. She sensed the money wouldn't go far. "Not long if we're lucky. It all depends on Mr. Douglas." The famous Frederick Douglass met the three of them in a little room off the red and gold lobby of the Kirkwood Hotel. Truth gaped at him as he shook hands with Squire. He was wonderfully handsome, a big, bronze-skinned man with strong features, gleaming dark eyes, and a mane of black hair streaked with gray, and a full beard to match. He wore elegant black broadcloth. Once he had greeted Squire and Lily, he turned to Truth and said in a deep and musical voice, "What can I do for you, Quaker maid? Take off your bonnet. I'd like to see your eyes." Frightened, Truth obeyed and then fell silent. Only when nudged by Lily did she answer, "It's my cousin, Mr. Douglas. His name is Robert Bardwell, and he's in the federal prison in Elmira. He didn't want to be a Confederate soldier." She rushed on, telling him about the Underground Railroad because she knew of his deep interest in it, and ended with, "My uncle's sick at a doctor's house in New York, and Squire brought me here to thee because perhaps thee could get the president to help me get Robert out." Now Douglas spoke. "It's quite a story, child. Perhaps I can help you," he frowned. "But not through Mr. Lincoln. I think I know a better way. Sit down here and wait." Squire, his wife, and Truth sat on fancy red plush chairs with thin gilded legs, while Frederick Douglass went over to an ornate desk. He took a sheet of hotel stationery, wrote on it, and folded it. Handing the note to Truth, he said, "I have a liking for Quakers. Once I was a runaway slave, too. When I stood afraid beside a road, a Quaker stopped his carriage and said to me, 'Get thee in.' And I did. I think you will get to Mr. Lincoln faster through this person. Ask the guards at the Executive Mansion to see that this reaches her tonight. Wait outside. Expect to have her maid come for you." Truth stared down at the note. It was addressed to Madam Lincoln from Frederick Douglass, the President's wife. "I thank thee, sir," Truth said sincerely. "Good luck to you, child." 20 minutes later, the two black people and Truth stood before a large house with columns and gardens on either side. They were let in through iron gates by Union soldiers. More armed soldiers stopped them as they approached the entrance, and the address on the note was once more examined. It was now handed to a young soldier, who took it around the side of the building. They waited, listening to crickets and breathing in the sour smell of the brackish water behind the White House. Just as the moon rose in the early evening sky some 15 minutes later, a plump, middle-aged black woman wearing a lacy white apron came to them through the front door. She said softly, "For Mr. Douglass's sake, Mrs. Lincoln will see you for a few minutes. Come with me." They followed the woman, who led them to a side door that she held open. She said, "Follow me, please." They walked down corridors that turned this way and that, past rooms with closed doors and others with doors opened wide enough for Truth to peep in and see velvet and satin draperies, lavishly gilded furniture, and pure white lace curtains that made her gasp because they were so beautiful. The maid finally stopped at a door, knocked, and listened. Then she stood back to let the three visitors enter. This room was mostly blue and white, and though it wasn't large, it was furnished with fine pieces: settees, a desk, several chairs, and a large, highly polished rocking chair. A small, plump woman sat in it, reading. Her skin was powdery white, and her hair dark, and her eyes dark. Her low-cut gown was white muslin, with skirt flounces of deep rose. Red stones circled her neck and dangled from her ears. She set her book down and said in a low voice, "I am Mary Lincoln. Mr. Douglass says a Quaker girl came to ask a favor of him. He has suggested that I help you. What is it you ask, child?" Nudged again by Lily, Truth told her story, finishing with, "I want to ask the President to write a letter for Robert to get him out of prison." Mrs. Lincoln nodded. "Robert, you say, and Todd. Did you know that I have a son named Robert, and that my maiden name is Todd?" "No, ma'am, I didn't." "I came here from Illinois. You speak like someone from the West." "I am from Indiana, Mrs. Lincoln. I'm an orphan now, so I live with my mother's folks in North Carolina. I came north with my uncle, but he got hurt in New York City. He's a conductor on the Underground Railroad. He sent my friends here north." Mrs. Lincoln's dark brows rose. "Well, that is quite a tale. Your cousins refused to take up arms for the Confederacy?" "That's right," Truth hesitated, but then added, "or for the North either. Robert shouldn't be in one of thy prisons then, should he, ma'am?" Mrs. Lincoln let out her breath. She got up and went to the desk and sat down. "Give me Robert's full name, and yours too." Truth replied, "Robert Bardwell, a friend from North Carolina, and Tabitha Ruth Hopkins." Mrs. Lincoln wrote quickly. "Wait here," she said. She went through a door that connected her room with another and left the door half open. A man's husky, weary-sounding voice asked, "What is it, my dear? You know how I feel about interruptions." He gave a deep sigh. "The President." Truth's flesh froze, and she clasped her hands to her mouth in fright. She could hear murmurings, but nothing more, until President Lincoln said, "Yes, I see, I see." Then there was a long silence. From where she stood, Truth peeked through the partially open door. At first, no one was visible, but all at once she saw against some white curtains the silhouette of a very tall, very thin, stooped man. Truth saw him hand something to Mrs. Lincoln. Truth's heart gave a leap. He'd given her a piece of white paper. The President said